right, good afternoon or good morning, depending on which coast or non-coast you're in. I'm going to get started on time and people can join us because we got a lot to cover. And I'm hoping that we get some time for you to have some breakout conversations. It's hard to do in an hour, but we'll see. I'm from Jersey, so I can speak really fast. So once we start running out of time, you'll just have to try to keep up. So I want to introduce myself. I'm Brian Frick. I serve in theology, formation, and evangelism in the national offices in the Presbyterian Mission Agency. My area is Christian formation, and I came by way of camp and retreat ministry. So I'm currently working at Stony Point Center, trying to figure out where we're headed from here. But my passion really over the last 2 or 3 years has been around formation and how do we form community. Obviously, my entry was by way of camp and retreats. And for me, sitting around a campfire is the essence of a formed community, short formed community. But that's really been my driving force. How many of you have been, and let me also introduce Stephanie, your host. Stephanie serves as the coordinator for Christian formation. And it is an incredible resource for anything formation. But specifically these practices. She's been doing an excellent job with the toolkit, which we'll give you a link to at the end. So Stephanie is more than just the host for this event. She's also a really good resource in this area. So how many of you have been to a session that I've led before, either at APSI or somewhere else? All right, you liked it so much you came back for more. That's good. Some of what we talk about will be similar, but if you've been before, I'm glad you're back. If you're here for the first time, obviously, we'll cover everything that you need to know in an hour to make community through practices. This is a great group. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. We'll do a PowerPoint walkthrough of various different elements. Let me see if I can get there, share screen. All right, can everybody see that? I can no longer see you, which I don't like. There we go. All right, so what we're gonna, I'm sorry, go ahead, Stephanie.
I just said it's set up well, you're good.
Okay, good. What we're gonna do today is we're gonna introduce community and practices. We're gonna look for some research that tells us why some of the stuff that we're talking about has worked in other situations. We're going to give you some examples that will happen in different areas of the church so that you can get an understanding of how it works. And then we'll either have a group conversation if we don't have much time, or we'll do a breakout conversation if we have some time, where you'll be able to really dig into one of the practices. And then we have some resources at the end and a bibliography to kind of help you as you move forward. So as we get started here, how am I going to make this thing move? There we go. All right, so some of this concept, a lot of what we do in the church is program-based. We deal with different ages for different things and whatnot. And one of the things we're trying to look at is how do you move from programs into practices? And so Doug Anderson, a friend of mine, went to a session, and her big takeaway, her aha moment from that was that programs are for education, whereas processes are for transformation. So if you can change the way that you're doing things, that's going to be a lasting transformation, which is what practices hopefully are doing. So what are we talking about? Practices here. So practice is to carry out or perform a particular activity, method, or custom habitually and regularly. Okay, so a practice you have to keep doing. Right? Obviously, if you're a baseball player, you're going to practice pitching. You do the same thing over and over. And with a baseball player, as an example, that pitcher eventually gets so used to doing it that his muscles know exactly how or where to throw the ball, and she's able to get the ball over the plate. I can't do that. But that's practice. Okay, so that's broadly practice. It's carrying out and performing something repeatedly. Community. So community is defined as a feeling of fellowship with others as a result of sharing common attitudes, interests, and goals. Obviously, you can have a physical community like a town is a community, but this is more the community that forms when we're talking about a faith community. It's a feeling of fellowship with others. Yes, it's a group that comes together, but it's that depth of connection that we're really looking for when we talk about community. So jumping into some research here, this is the driest short book you'll ever read. It's about 100 pages. Don't recommend it, but it's really impactful. And Lev and Wenger did a study where they wanted to understand how people formed and learned. And what they found, it was on learning actually. What they found is that people didn't learn by the instruction model that we normally do. They learned by imitating and practice. So there was more learning that happened by doing than there was by telling somebody how to do. Seems kind of obvious. So situated learning theory is what they came up with. And organizations foster identity by increasing levels of related shared practices. And the deeper a person goes into membership in the organization, the deeper the practice is. Okay, so as an entry level, I'm going to give some examples here. So if we look at situated learning from the Presbyterian Mission Agency, where Stephanie and I work, base employee, so an entry-level employee, general employee, I came up with base as the word, things that they're going to do regularly, the mission statement, okay, and understanding that M25, Matthew 25 is what the national church is looking at. So we're looking at ways to alleviate poverty, ways to address institutional racism, and ways to help with congregational vitality. So that's the underpinning of our work. So when we look at our work, it should fit into one or all of those. We have an annual meeting where we recognize people's service and we do a learning. And then we have weekly worship available. And we get the basics of Presbyterianism, although it's not necessarily taught, it's a lot of assumed. So that's a pretty basic entry level, right? We all kind of get that. If you move up into the next level, the leadership cabinet, the LC, I just put that short, they meet monthly. So this is the director level and other support groups. One of the things that they do is they read their mission statement, which is a little bit different because it's for the leadership, at every meeting. So they're grounding that mission statement a little bit deeper. They rotate devotions. So where the employees that they're gathering, they'll have somebody lead worship. In this one, they rotate worship, and it's based on one of the three things, Matthew 25, and the leader can come up with it. So what that's doing is that's showing that Matthew 25 weaves through it, but by allowing people to come up with it, they're trying to embed that deeper understanding. They share, so what's going on in different areas and how can we focus more? And these are cradle Presbyterians, or at least assumed to be cradle Presbyterians. So the understanding of Presbyterians and what we do is understood. It comes out in the talk, which we're going to get into common communal memory next. But it's not something that we have to revisit because we've been doing it long enough, right? That practice is already embedded. We go to church enough, we know that sort of stuff. The PMA board, Presbyterian Mission Agency board, they have a quarterly meeting. They have Matthew 25 organized by committee. And then they have an organized worship leader. Again, these are cradle Presbyterians, and these folks know theology as well as the processes. So again, it's a little bit deeper. So the deeper you go into leadership, the more those practices deepen, even to the point where you know them enough that you just do them, right? This is the muscle memory of that picture. If you do it enough, it just becomes part of who you are, which also moves from program into process. This is how we process our lives. Okay, keep moving here. The other one that I want to say that some of the basis behind this is the idea of communal memory. And this was controversial when it came out, but the more you think about it, it's got to come from somewhere. So this idea is the collective concept for all knowledge that directs behavior and experience in the interactive framework of a society, and one that obtains through generations in repeated society practices. That's a really long, I don't even think it's really that good of a way, but that's it's a dictionary definition of communal memory. Basically, if we do things together, when we, in the church, if we were to do something that was deep and memorable, I can't really give you an example. When we're in that situation again, it'll be as if we're there, right? So a communal memory is a shared memory. Say you went to a monastery, say you went to Iona as an example. So if you went to Iona, you had a deep experience. If you come back from Iona, and somebody else that went at a different time has that same experience, your memory of that, your brain actually responds as if you were there. Okay, so there's lots of things where when they get repeated in life, it's as if you go back to there. And then the other understanding is that, we weren't there when the country was founded, just use that as an example. But we have shared memories that we've been taught and passed along of what our society is. So we might have differing opinions because we come from different places, but our understanding of America is shared. And you could say that about your community as well. And you can say that about your church. There's one church in Kansas City that has love written on, or joy written on the side of their building. They're the Joy Church. And they have everything based around that. There's different understandings of who we are because of a communal memory. Okay, so putting this together, why is this important? Why am I telling you this history? So if we share in repeated practices, habitual practices, this is going to foster identity, right? The more I am exposed to using the Presbyterian model, Presbyterian meetings or synod meetings or General Assembly or those different things, or just going to church on a regular basis, the more I'm going to identify as part of that group. These practices create memories for the group over time. And that memory, those are the things that get passed down as societal norms. That's the things that we model to our children, that we pass on, that are just the underpinnings of who we are. And then that's going to direct your action, and it bonds you as a group with a shared understanding. So that's really important. If you go to a Methodist church, it's going to feel different. But for the Methodists, it just feels like the water that they swim in. And if a Methodist were to go to a Presbyterian church, they would have that same experience, but it becomes a group shared understanding over time. That group then becomes a community, and the community idea is essential because without community, you can't foster faith. Jesus never sat in a room by himself and talked to himself and deepened faith. It was always a communal experience when you look at the gospel. All right, so looking at practices, and this is where I want to give you some visuals so you can understand practice versus program. Sorry, I'm plugging my computer in, which I should have done earlier. There we go. So in the Jewish world, there's two things that I think are really important to know. One is that the Torah is only written in Hebrew. There are, of course, translations of it, but when they roll out the scroll, it's in Hebrew, right? The words are the same, the shapes are the same. To read it, you have to know Hebrew. So if you have any friends or family who come from a Jewish background, they'll go through a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah. And one of the things that they do is they learn Hebrew. Why do they learn Hebrew? There's two reasons they learn Hebrew. One, so that they can read the scriptures. And two, it's for identity purposes. That is a part of who they are as a people, as a faith people, and as just a identity. So if you have to learn that, I grew up Catholic, and I grew up after Vatican II, but my mom used to go to church, and it was all in Latin. There was different issues. She didn't learn Latin, but that identity formation. The other thing that we know that Jews do more than Christians, we talk about it, but their concept of Sabbath, and I want to recommend to you the book Sabbath by Abraham Heschel. I'll have it at the end. He does an amazing job of explaining Sabbath. But the idea of Sabbath is a way to honor your time, and we'll get into this later, as holy moments instead of earthly moments. So you're trading your earthly rhythms for your holy rhythms, and they don't work. But the thing that Sabbath does is it enables them to have time to be in community with each other without the expectation of toiling and producing. I could go into Sabbath for a long time, but these are two examples, not the only ones, of Jewish practices. The other thing that Jews do deeper and different than we do is they go through a whole cycle of celebrations and holidays in a different way than we do. Obviously, we do Easter, we do different holidays, but they have a different understanding. They're telling the story of their people over time in a different way than we do as Christians. Jumping into Jesus. So Jesus's practices for the general population. Okay, so we can look at things that happened almost every time Jesus was with a group. Miracles happened, right? Mud on the eyes making somebody see. making somebody come up from the grave, turning water into wine, right? There were these things that happened. So if you went to a Jesus event, experience, teaching, learning, you'd have this sense of awe and wonder. That was something that happened. Jesus was showing you this different way that you'd understand the world. Teachings, especially in parables, was something that you see throughout the time when Jesus is with the general population. So teaching is a big part of Jesus, experiencing Jesus. Prayer. Obviously, we know this, Jesus would often point to his Father. He would go away and pray. There's an element of prayer and holiness in that. And food. I'm just going to throw that out because when Jesus was with people, it was usually a longer experience, and food was a part of it. People would bring food. It was an expectation that they would share food. We obviously hear about that in the fish and the loaves and fishes, but you got to think food was definitely an element in Jesus's teaching. So general population. So this is the entry level of understanding Jesus back when Jesus was doing his preaching. Next level were his disciples, right? That's kind of like the inner level, the people who know a little bit more. Miracles now moved from seeing miracles to participating in miracles, right? So it's a next level. Walking on water, Peter walking on water, the loaves and the fishes, they actually had to go and collect them, right? They put them out and then they collected them. And so they had this deeper understanding experiences of, oh, wow, this is something that we're invited to be a part of. Teachings were direct and personal. He was often telling Peter what he should be doing or how he wasn't seeing things correctly. Teaching became direct. It was less a universal. There are times where it was universal, but it was very much in response to questions. So it was very invitational. Prayer, there was more retreating when he was solo. He'd spend time with the disciples. You can use the example of the feeding of the 5,000. He went off in a boat ahead of them. And there's other times where he retreated into the mountains to pray. So this idea of retreating, as well as corporately praying, comes in with disciples. And obviously food comes back again several times, but the one that we obviously think about and celebrate on a monthly basis for Presbyterians, more for other faiths, is the Last Supper. So using food, which is a common part of being human, as a way to remind us of Jesus, the teachings, the holiness. The food is in there. So you see how that's gone deeper? Congregation. So how do we take that? Right? So this is different. I don't know if this is deeper or just the way we do it now. But we've incorporated many of Jesus's practices into the order of worship. Right? So we've got, welcome and invitation. We've got passing of the peace. We've got the sharing of the word. We've got the preached word. We've got benediction. We've got different ways of doing that. We also have practices of leadership. In the Presbyterian Church, in my experience becoming an elder, I always found it odd when people laid hands on you. The laying of hands, some people have a hard time with, but the neat part of that and the practice part of that, and also the communal memory part of that, is the laying on of hands is a way to pass on that ordination, being ordained as an elder, from person to person to person to person. So that person, that elder laying their hand on you, had the previous elder's hand on them, had the previous elder's hand on them. So it's a way of celebrating our history in that one act. So leadership, membership, ways to be a part. And then of course, sacraments. We celebrate baptism and we celebrate communion periodically, but these are a way to remind us of our faith and practice our faith. There's lots of others. I just wanted to point those ones out to try to get your concept that practices are already happening in your church. Why am I already going over practices if you're already doing it? What I'd like to point out is that these are practices that we've inherited over time, and they work for us. They probably work from some Generation Xers all the way down to Silence and the Greatest Generation. They happened earlier. We've changed, which there's lots that you could go into with generational theory, but how do we make our faith practices more intentional and more obvious so that people that have not been involved in the church, because most of us grew up, our parents went to church, our grandparents went to church. It's what we did, right? We're cradle Presbyterians or Baptists or whatever your faith tradition is. Most of us have had that passed on. It's just part of who we are. But we're finding that the generations that are now, their parents might not have gone and they may be new to it. So how do we create a sense of practice that is intentional, but also becomes part of the water? So one of the things that we did as the Office of Formation is we looked at practices from a deeper perspective. We call them Sabbath practices. So when we frame our times of communal gathering as Sabbath, it helps us understand the importance of stopping so that we may dwell with God and one another. Okay, so the depth of the idea of practice is to stop doing what we do in the world, stop toiling, crawling on our belly, whatever that is, that toiling and bringing food out of the earth. Stop that and do some things regularly. And we're going to give you some examples of that. So the 5 practices that we came up with in the Office of Formation were hospitality, prayer, service, storytelling, and retreat. How did we get to this, you might ask? Well, these are not the only practices. These are practices that we identified. We gathered folks from all different levels of formation, from older adults all the way down to children, to camp and retreats, to ministers, pastors who are in the pulpit. And we asked them, how were you formed? What are your memories of how your faith was passed on? And they gave examples of memories. And then we said, what was the practice behind it? What was something that happened regularly in that you feel was probably the underpinning? Because practices are kind of underpinnings, they're groupings. So hospitality, prayer, service, storytelling, and retreat are what came out of that. You might have different practices in your church, but I'm just going to use those as an example. So let's walk through them. When we think about hospitality, this is more than having a greeter at the door. We're practicing in hospitality. We're affirming the worth of all God's people, right? So hospitality is that deep welcome, that understanding that when you're looking at a person, you're not just looking at them physically as a human, you're looking at them as a child of God. We're putting these stories of Jesus into action. We're allowing God's people to share their gifts. Hospitality can be a two-way experience, and it can be a way for somebody to give of themselves without expecting things back. Sometimes you can kind of mix service and hospitality, but hospitality is more of a welcome. We remember that we're once strangers and might be strangers again, right? Ever walk into a church that you didn't grow up in or you didn't experience? One of the first ways that you're going to be invited into that, like you're never going to join a community that you don't feel welcome in. It's never going to happen. So one of the first ways that we do it is we welcome that stranger because we want that to happen when we go to another place. Okay, so that's hospitality. Whoops, lost something here. Spinning blue wheel. Oh, here we go. Prayer. Prayer is speaking to God and allowing God to speak to us. We talk and we listen. Practice of prayer and community is important for reconciliation with God and one another so that we can go back into the world and bear witness to God's reconciling love. There's no one way to pray. We can be very creative about how we do prayer. Sometimes our churches, and again, this goes back to the order of worship, get kind of rote in how we do prayer. And we might want to think about how we can be more creative in what we pray. Ages and stages, different groups can engage in prayer in different ways. So exploring new ways is very important. It can also be very hard. Diane Moffat says the only person who likes change is a baby. And they usually cry when that's happening. So change things up, it's really helpful. But prayer is a way to connect us as a community, corporate prayer, but also connects our understanding of our faith and our connection to God. Service. So in Sabbath, we engage in activities that are set apart from our everyday activities. Holy activity of service can start within a faith community. Service is the greatest commandment, right? uh, do unto others, love others as I have loved you. It's that deep welcome of the stranger, but it's also taking care of the stranger. It's the basis of Matthew 25, right? When did I see you naked? When did I clothe you? When did I feed you? That's service. And we do that out of a calling and a giving, because we benefit because it deepens our faith and understanding, because we're being the hands and feet of Jesus, and it's bettering our community. Regardless, service should have no expectation. It's not a transaction; it's a gift. So practicing service is responding to God's grace for all humankind. God loved us, and so our response to God's love is to follow God's commandment and take care of others. That's service. Storytelling. I love storytelling. Sharing about ourselves with others, about what it means to be children of God, is essential. Practicing storytelling, we're encouraging one another in our faith's journey and creating space. Through storytelling, we establish ourselves within the long history of God's Sabbath community. I think that's really important, because there's different levels of storytelling, right? There's telling about myself, and then there's telling about us. So throughout the Bible, you see storytelling constantly. Old Testament is telling the story of, who begot who and what happened and the whole experience. And telling the New Testament it's very based on the gospel, and the stories and experiences that go through that. We often, when you're studying a gospel, you'll often see it broken down into parts, and it's usually a progression from birth to teaching to death. So it is a story of our faith, and we place ourselves in that. So storytelling is very essential. Slowing down and intentionally participating in recalling our story and listening to others. This imitates what Jesus modeled in community. Oftentimes Jesus, kind of knew what was going on, but Jesus also listened. The woman at the well story, right? Yes, Jesus knew a lot of things, but he also allowed the woman at the well to tell her story. I think storytelling is essential. I would argue, not everybody agrees with me, but I would argue that storytelling is the underpinning of all of this. Because if we're going to be a community, we need to know each other. And the way that we know each other is we tell each other's story. I would also say that you're going to see storytelling every Sunday, because your pastor, when preaching, or whoever's preaching, is going to be telling a lot of stories during that time, right? We hear stories when we do meeting and greeting before and after church. One of the things I don't think that we do very well in many of our denominations is allow individuals to tell their story, because our worship services are organized, right? How can you have that unstructured time when we're going to worship? Because through practicing, this follows this, follows this, follows this, right? That's part of it. But how are we going to weave in stories? Because the people that are sitting in that pew next to you are just as important to God's story as Zacchaeus was. That's just as important. It's God's revelation through us now, just like it was then. But I think that we do not do a really good job of telling stories. We might when we work with children, but we're not so much. We often don't share each other's story. We teach the stories of the Bible. I can go on and on about storytelling, but I think that opening up the idea that people need an entry point. The other thing that I would argue with this is that younger generations, especially generations that have not been going to church, need to hear your story. They need to know who you are, why you're there, what drives you to be there, how your faith is expressed in this. That doesn't happen in Sunday. I mean, that doesn't happen during that 1-2 hours, whatever your worship service is. You might get a hello and how are you? And hey, you're younger, what brings you to the church, whatever that might be. But you're not going to hear the stories of, somebody surviving the death of a child, or, somebody's story about how excited they were that their child got into a college of their choice, whatever that might be. The depth of the story is what creates that community. And so many of us have been going to church for so long and serving with each other that, if we're doing, outreach on whatever outreach we do, and we've been doing it with the same group of 12 people, of course we share stories when we're packaging those backpacks that we might give to students to go to school. That's storytelling. But what do we do more that makes the church community a whole community and not a series of activity communities. I go on with storytelling. I'm going to stop. Retreat. This is, again, essential. So I would put retreat second only to storytelling, because we need to get away. Jesus got away. We need to get away from the busyness of our lives and our expectations so that we can dwell with others and with God. So if you've been on a retreat, I'm sure almost all of you have been on a retreat. You might have a topic, you might have a planning, you might have a whatever, but the feeling that you're going to come away from a retreat is you're going to feel renewed, you're going to feel relaxed, and you're going to feel engaged and empowered in a different way. I'd argue that when Jesus went away to retreat, oftentimes he'd go up a mountain to pray. When he'd come back down, his ministry would take a different direction, and he would talk in a different direction. So I think that, I think that's important. So retreat. So I'd like to take a moment here. I don't have the chat up. I want to see if I can open my chat for a second here, just to see if I'm missing any conversations. So needed retreat. Yes, I'm hearing. Good. Will slides be available? Yes. Stephanie put my email address. If you'd like these slides, we didn't put them in as the resources. I tend to be a person that has to process closer to an event, so I'm not really good at getting you your resources in advance. But we have these available. I'd be more than happy to email them to you. Just send me an email and we can walk through them. So what I would like to do is just spend the next 10 minutes, and Stephanie is going to do this for you. And Stephanie, maybe we could also, when the group goes, I should have asked you to do this before, put these questions, the first two, in there. I want to talk about storytelling, because you need to practice if you're going to do any of these practices. What I'd like you to do is talk to each other about, where do you see storytelling in your congregation now? And then the next level question is, how can you weave storytelling practices through your congregational experiences? For example, how do we do that when we're serving others? How do we do that when we're gathering children together? How do we do that when we're doing a Bible study together, when we're doing whatever it is that we're doing together as a church, or worship on Sunday? What are ways that we can do that? Because, and I didn't really say this either, but jumping back to the communal memory and the idea of practices, it needs to weave through the different experiences of your church, so that, say I'm a person that really wants to do homelessness work. I want to go out there and I want to be with homeless people, serving them, finding out what their needs are and taking care of them and helping them not be homeless. Or if they are homeless, just taking care of food and all of those sorts of things. How does storytelling weave into that? Or I might be a person that is, maybe I'm in the praise band. And that's who I am. And that is my contribution and the way that I interact in my service, really. How does storytelling weave into my being a member of the praise band? You get what I'm saying? You could go on many different levels here, but for every level of your church, if you're having a picnic celebration, how does storytelling weave into that? We would do things that were silly, like having a trivia night. It just gathered the group together, which is great, but how does storytelling weave into that? I'd know the people that it came with, but how could I go deeper into storytelling? I hope that makes sense. But if you want these practices to be an underpinning, because again, these practices are weaving your faith together. They're not necessarily Jesus's story, but they're a way to weave the community together, so that they're just the way that we interact. They're a process that we go through. They're not a program that we show up to. Does that make sense for people? I wish I could see your hands. Go like this if it makes sense. Or smile. I see some smiles. That's good. Okay, so Stephanie, if you could break them into groups. We're going to do groups of 2, so that you can just talk one-on-one with a person. It'll give you time to go a little bit deeper. So kind of look at your clock at 5 minutes, or just go back and forth in your conversation. Where do you see storytelling in your congregation, and how do you think that you can weave it throughout different parts of the ministries in your congregation? And then we'll see you back here in about 10 minutes.
I'm gonna do, it says groups of 2 or 3, and I think that'll help not,
Okay.
like if anybody ends up alone, please come back into the main room and we'll get you into a room.
Thanks, Stephanie.
And how long would you like to do these for?
10 minutes should be good.
Okay.
The only thing about my bed, about when we move it, when we had the bed bugs bad, before Beth had sprayed, she wanted everybody to put covers on it. Well, we got the cheap ones this time instead of the.
You gonna stop share there, Brian?
Yeah. I've got one more screen I'm going to share at the end.
Okay.
Let's stop and we can see everybody. Let's see. How do I stop share? There
So
it
I
is.
can see who didn't get into a room. Okay, Kendall and Anne. Do you need help getting into a room?
You're on mute, Kendall.
There. No, I just haven't hit the button yet.
Okay.
Yeah, my for some reason my computer isn't recognizing my camera or Zoom isn't recognizing my camera.
Okay.
And so I don't know what's going on there. I'm trying to figure it out.
Okay. Do you want to go into your room? We can hear you fine.
Sure.
Okay. Let me see where you're at.
There's room 19 and room 20 who only have one person. I decided not to join the room.
Move forward. 19.
Oh no, 22 has 2. 21 now has 2. 21 or 20 is now empty, which is good. I think you did it.
Okay, but I want to move. Oh, that was not good. Sorry, Susan Sharp Campbell.
Did you just boot her?
I just, he's probably coming back in here.
I hope you remember what room she was in.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the only thing about small groups is it's hard to make sure that everybody.
Is Anne going to a room?
Anne, and I can't find you.
I'm still here.
I know it's so weird because it doesn't, might need GNTV to help me. So I don't have you as not joining a
I'm
room.
not distressed. I'm not, but this is weird because I had no problem last night with connecting with my regional gathering or anything. So I'm stymied why it's decided all of a sudden to not recognize my camera.
That's odd.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on.
I can put you in the waiting room, but that's not going to help anything.
Can you find Anne anywhere?
I can support you.
I'm sorry. Oh, I see her there. There she is.
I see her as a participant.
Okay, Anne, I'm just gonna like move you and see if you see it pop up then.
Okay.
I'm gonna put you, I'm just gonna choose a random one. Nope. Oh my gosh. That was the wrong person. These people, I'm so sorry, Brian. That was not good. Yeah, there was another Anne, I think, and I just realized too late that it was ANN and you're ANNE.
Right.
Oh, she's supposed to be
Excuse me.
in room 13. She hasn't joined, it says. I wonder if, are you on a phone, Anne?
No, I'm on a laptop.
And you don't see a little thing pop up?
No.
because I
No,
think you have to accept it. It doesn't look like I'm able to.
I'm gonna try moving her to a different room. Can I do that?
Yeah, that's what I just tried. Go for it. Let me.
Oh, where'd she go? Unassigned. I'm gonna move you to room 3. Did anything pop up?
no, sorry guys. Clearly it's a problem at my end. So
Well,
I'm not distressed about it. Like,
okay.
it's not the end of the world if I miss the 5 minutes that are left in the conversation. It's okay.
Let me ask.
So where are you from, Anne?
Woodstock, Ontario.
Ah, okay. I was just up in New Hampshire and I was 50 miles from the border and I just thought, wow, I am up here. I know that that's nowhere near Woodstock, Ontario, but it was up there.
Yeah.
Probably north of Woodstock.
Possibly, yeah, because we're on the way, down to Windsor. So we're not quite as south as Windsor, but we're
All right, okay. Are you
Yeah.
close to Goderich at all?
yeah, we're about hour and a half southeast.
Right. So
Of
I've got a
Goderich.
friend that runs Camp Kintail, which is right on.
Oh, Teresa!
Yeah,
I've known Teresa forever.
amazing, right?
Yes, she is awesome. Yes,
Yep.
and Jonathan, yeah.
Very
Um,
gifted.
They've done incredible stuff to weather this.
Oh yeah,
They're just amazing people.
yeah. And the amount of ministry that they do on that 18 acres is just.
Yeah, it is
Amazing.
unbelievable.
And you walk
Absolutely
through little
unbelievable.
sections of wood and you feel like you're in a different place altogether.
Yes.
So well designed.
So are you in camping ministry too?
I am.
Yeah. Okay.
I am.
Brian, real quick, what would you like me to broadcast into the room? What's the question?
Yeah, I think you're good. It was just
You
those
feel good?
questions.
Okay.
They weren't that deep.
Okay.
It's very strange, I'm going to say, Stephanie, to do this online instead of in person. Because you know me, I'm a mover, I'm a talker, and I need to read faces. If I'm not reading the faces, I just feel like it comes off really dry.
Yeah, it's hard. Everybody says that it's hard. You can read faces better if you're not doing a slideshow, but you can see everybody and you're not on a webinar. But
next time.
It
well,
is.
by that time, we'll all be out of COVID and we'll be able to do these things in person again.
I know. There will always be a hybrid form of this, I think, though. Lots of people that couldn't join otherwise.
I just had a pop-up inviting me to go to room 11.
Okay. Well, you've got a few minutes left.
I think I might not disrupt what's happening in room 11.
Okay,
I think it
okay,
might be an
that's fine.
intrusion. But
Stephanie's glad because she figured it out.
No, I didn't. GNTV did.
Ah.
Just bizarre.
Huh. Have you been to APSI before, Anne?
I came the year it was in Toronto.
Oh, right.
Wow.
But sadly, that's it. Usually budget is just not allowable. But I have, received emails and sort of kept in touch and so on. So great resources. It's awesome. And our CE staff at Knox here in town, I convinced her to come to the conference as well. So she's doing different workshops than me. So I'm excited for her to be part of it.
That's great. That's one of the things Stephanie I have been talking about, and also a lot of camp and retreat people, is the access.
Yes.
Camps have always talked about how do we make the experience go home instead of just a 1 week experience. And we have to now. We have to go to homes. So the challenge is going to be, how do we keep people connected? Oh, I also had a conversation. The woman that gave me the quote, the Doug Anderson quote at the beginning, said, Brian, I'm never going to go to another national conference. And I was like, that's terrible, especially for this. But she said, the amount of money that I spent to get there, now I can bring my whole church for less than I could send myself and 2 other people, which, some people want it in person. I want it in person. But the access, especially to smaller churches who don't have the same budget that some of our larger churches do. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I would love to see, I love the big group thing, but I'd also love to see a Canadian Christian Educators Conference that addresses our context specifically, or even just in Ontario. Like we've got great, like even if we were to meet at Kintail or Sweet Hills or something, that would be, yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah. One of the things I'd like to explore from the national level is to do, you know, big teaching with smaller groups and then broadcast it out. And then the possibility of doing regional gatherings could kind of come into that, where you're seeing it all together. And then
yeah, that's awesome.
I think we'll get creative. Hopefully we've learned something through this horrible COVID experience. It's nice to meet you, Anne.
You too. Thanks so much for this. It's great.
Yeah,
We're coming back in.
Okay.
Oh, and Brian, we can add your slides to the event landing page. Everybody that registered for the event has access to the event for 90 days, and APSI members have access to the event forever.
That's great. If you can make that happen, that'd be wonderful. This is my favorite part of these group ones, because it's like the holodeck where everybody reappears on the Enterprise. It's not really my favorite part, but it's one of my favorite parts.
Be about another minute before everybody comes back.
Okay.
Or the rooms kick them out.
Right. Some groups go straight to the end, and then when they show up back in this room, they're still talking. I enjoy those a lot too.
They broke us up. They closed us. So
Yes.
I thought we were disappeared.
Like, Lucy, you were in the middle of a sentence when suddenly you were gone.
I know I was gone.
I'm sure it was a good sentence.
Sorry if I messed anybody up in the very beginning. I was like trying to move people around, and I was teleporting you through space.
I apologize for popping in and out, but I had virtual annual event team duty in the marketplace. So
It's all good.
I did my duty.
We're glad you're here. And we're glad you did your duty. We like your background. I've seen it before.
Okay, I've put in the chat a link to the Faith Formation, Christian Formation Toolkit. I think we're all back.
Okay, before I forget, oh, this is so much better. I was just saying, when we weren't in one of those rooms, I hope your rooms were good, but I'm kind of a mover and a talker when I'm leading sessions. So it's really hard, especially when half of your screen or most of your screen is just a slideshow. So this is much better. I can see at least a third of your faces. I just keep moving back and forth. Two things that I'd like to do. One, we have a practices toolkit that Stephanie is putting the link, or did put the link in the chat. She just said that. It's amazing. We gathered Christian educators together from various different backgrounds. It does everything from intergenerational children's ministry to older adult ministry to intergenerational ministry. And it does it through these practices. So it's free. So everybody loves free. I encourage you to look at that. And we did them as toolkits rather than curriculum, so that it can be tailored to your situation more. I really enjoy them. I think it's one of the best things we've done. And Stephanie was important in spearheading that. The other thing that I want to do is I'm going to share my screen one more time here. See if it'll pop back up. There we go. And then we'll talk about what you guys shared. But I just want to walk through some books, because I know people love knowing where stuff comes from. So my next screen, if I can get it to work, is books. Okay, so some books. If you want to go deeper into practices and understand where this thought is woven from, because there's a lot of different parts of this. So the Sabbath, I already said that. It is the quickest read theology book I have ever done in my life. It's probably about 120, 150 pages, not that big, but I did it in one evening. I couldn't put it down. I've never said that before. So that one I would definitely get. Community called Tizay. If anybody's aware of Tizay songs, right? We do Tizay worship. That's really not, those are prayers, they're not songs. Tizay is an amazing place. It's the largest gathering of young adults in the world. Over 100,000 young adults come through there every year. And they do practices. They do prayer, which is those sung things 3 times a day. And they used to do high church. They used to do French liturgy. And then they decided that people are coming from all over the world and they don't know that. So they'll actually take those prayers. And there's a great way to think about how do you make things accessible is they ask you before you come what your native language is. And they make sure during that time that at least one of the songs is done in your native language. So I was there for German week. I don't know why, but it must've been German spring break. So I'm in France and there's Germans all over the place. They did some in English. Latin is kind of the common language. Everybody kind of knows that or doesn't know that and sings it together. But they did German. So community called Taizé. Jason Santos did a great job dissecting the practices in there. Resident Aliens, I don't know why I put where do you see storytelling. And I'm forgetting who that's from, but that's essential. That's been around for years. Resident Aliens, you can find that. Sabbath is Resistance.
Will Williman and Stanley Hauerwas.
Yes. Can you say that again?
Will Williman and Stanley Hauerwas.
Thank you. Brueggemann's always good to read, but looking at Sabbath as a way, it's again underlining the idea of being in this world but not of this world. How can we be in a different space? Life Together, Bonhoeffer does a great job of describing community in life together. Practices for the refounding of God's people is another good way to look at practice. And intergenerational Christian formation. It's more on intergenerational, but I'm putting that in there because I just think getting generations together is the future of our church. I think if we don't go in that direction, I think practices are an entry to that. So again, this whole presentation will be available. So if you didn't write these down, you can get them by downloading it. And I'm going to stop sharing so I can see faces. All right, so we've got about 8 minutes left according to my computer here. What thoughts or questions have you had from this? And maybe you can, if you have that little raise hand button, that'll put you to the front of the queue so we can see you quicker. So this is that awkward moment where I either feel like I'm a genius because nobody has any questions or I feel like nobody tracked it all. So
Miriam, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Okay, well, I just want to say that I think when we're on Zoom with groups in our church, I think, it feels like we're together and it's a really important thing. But I've learned that it's really important to be intentional that every person has a chance to share because so many people will not speak up when there's so many on the screen. And I found that it's just amazing what some of the quiet people share when they actually are given their moment. And then I need to make a comment that I was kind of put off by all the references to cradle Presbyterians, because we have a lot of people in our church who did not grow up in the church at all. And that just bothered me. So I wanted to share that.
No, I appreciate that. And Miriam, I was trying to say that a lot of us that are right here have grown up in our church forever. Maybe not, but I'm glad to people that don't have that experience. That's what we need, right?
Yes.
And I really want to underline what you said was being intentional, right? You're saying be intentional on Zoom, which is important, but I think we really need to be intentional about how we think about forming community. So thank you. That's great. Do you see others, Stephanie? I see Laura.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I was going to just share a little bit of what we talked about in our group and just thank you because one of the things that I was able to identify in our congregation that preceded my work as associate pastor for congregational care and pastoral care was this early on the church started an Alzheimer's support group, caregiver support group, and then has Grief Share and has Alcoholics Anonymous, NAMI, mental health support, drug addiction for families support groups. And I realized that is a way of, that process is a way of sharing personal stories and kind of set out for how to listen to someone else's story. Those are not where we're sharing Bible stories, which I really value as well, and how to form community. But at the same time, it's been it's a good practice. And so thank you. Kind of help me affirm that there's some storytelling already happening. And then how would we do that when people who aren't in those self-selected storytelling groups
Yes.
or support groups, how do we do that with just, folks in the congregation who aren't part of those groups?
I find that interesting, Laura, that we do that in support groups or groups in need, right? Healing comes from telling story. Why don't we do it with everybody?
Right.
We're all broken, which means that to heal together, we need to know each other's story. So thank you. That's fantastic. Appreciate that, Laura. Katie, you had something?
Going to offer a word of encouragement about doing retreat by Zoom and not waiting until everything gets back to normal. A retreat had been scheduled and folks were leaning toward canceling it. And I said, well, I respect that if that's the choice you want to make, but I'm just saying I'm willing to do it and willing to experiment with you. And so the word came back, well, how few are you willing to do the retreat for? I said, well, do you have 4 people who are willing to be nurtured? Yeah. I mean, that would be lovely. How intimate and delightful. Well, the 4 turned into 7, turned into 10, turned into 12, turned into 15. We had 18 people for a 3-hour retreat that really felt like retreat. Right. We know better than to do retreat 8 hours, solid Zoom, but with interaction, with prayer, with song, with storytelling, and everyone really did leave refreshed, renewed, and ready to serve.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Others, I'm kind of scrolling through. I saw a hand. Where'd that go? That's Linda.
Oh, Linda, yes.
Okay, we've had more storytelling during the pandemic than we had before. We were trying to figure out, we had a little pastor and educator group trying to talk about how can we add stories. And before the lockdown, and that all just went to a close, but two things that have happened. One of our most intellectual Sunday school classes that sits together when we're at church now does Zoom, and we have they've started ending every Sunday school class by asking every single one of the boxes what's going on what went on during their week. And we're getting, people are now comfortable telling stories with tears in their eyes and things. We never knew the things about each other that we have learned. And what we decided, the reason we were trying to plan for storytelling was that we felt like the idea that Presbyterians, because we're intellectual and all that, we're uncomfortable storytelling.
True.
And there's no witness to the world if we aren't willing to tell our stories. And so we better practice with each other so that we're comfortable when we go out into the world. And so we now have all of our session meetings begin with being paired up with someone to pray with. And so we're learning about telling our stories that way too.
And that's storytelling, right? That's fantastic. The other thing I'd say, Linda, some of you all felt like you got cut off when we kicked you out of rooms. That was 10 minutes with 1 or 2 other people. If we open the door for storytelling, I honestly think people are hungry for it. You just have to be able to do it intentionally and welcoming and walk people along, because not everybody is. But usually once that ice gets broken, it's hard to keep to a schedule, really. I also want to invite you, and you guys can stick around longer. An hour is never long enough for this. We did 4.5 hours at Triennium once, not all in one session. But I would like to invite you, if this is something that you'd like to explore more with your congregation, let us know. We may be able to hook you up with a coach that could spend some time with your congregation. Can't promise that, but we do have some resources. And if you show interest in that, we definitely have some folks that we could reach out to who could just walk you through. And I know, like, Katie, you said retreat. Oftentimes coaching with a group feels like mini segments of a retreat that goes on for a long time, so that you start somewhere and you move. I'm a big fan of coaching. So if that's something that would help you, let us know, email us. Okay, any more thoughts? These are great, thank you. I'm going to just scan here. I see a dog. That's fantastic. Okay, Ginny Baker.
Just very quickly, and then maybe somebody said this and I didn't catch it, but I think that one of the tricks is finding the very simple question that you can ask people that's non-threatening, something they can share about themselves, that they don't think of it as storytelling, but then once they've done it a couple of times and you can introduce the notion to them that they're not only storytelling about themselves, but sharing faith as well. I'll give you a very quick example. I was in a workshop one time and the workshop leader, we were just sitting in a circle and she said, she had us go around the circle and just say, tell us your middle name and then tell us if you would keep it or change it if you had the choice. And it was fascinating to hear what people said about their middle names and whether they liked them or not, and whether they were part of their family history or not, and that kind of thing. And so, I mean, even just that simple and that basic can get people to open up in ways that they just don't think about that as being faith or storytelling.
That's fantastic. Ginny, that's a great one to end it on. Middle names, normally like they have a family history, right? They're usually passed on, and that gets people to remember. So again, there goes communal memory right in there, right? That brings in something that is going to make your communal memory of your family relevant to this community that hopefully is forming a family. Yeah, easy icebreakers, middle name, that's fantastic, Ginny. All right, so we're at the end of our hour. It went really fast. So if you'd like to stick around, you can. If you'd like to leave, go right ahead. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope this was helpful for you.
Bye. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Right.
Thanks. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Brian, this is
yes, Vicki.
This is Vicki Deeth, and I was going to ask if you could say just a few more words about the coaching that you're talking about. Is that for congregational coaching, or?
I have somebody in mind who hasn't volunteered to coach for this, but I know that he really is passionate about this and has time. And yeah,
as far as like a congregation towards congregational storytelling.
Yeah. So if you look at Carolyn Hampton, Carolyn joined an intergenerational group. She's one of the squares, Hollywood squares on the screen, and we coached about 3 or 4 people. For about a year of her church on intergenerational ministry. And I think they made some progress. We did various different ones on that topic. So, you know, this would be something that we would just connect you with somebody and you would work out how that would work, how many sessions, you know, what the cost is, those sorts of things. Does that help, Vicki? Because I think the challenge of coming to something like this, Vicki, is, you know, if you can share it, great. But if somebody wasn't there, it's always so hard to get them to come on board. You know what I mean? So that's why coaching, I think, is helpful. Stephanie and I are actually going to do a post event at the next one to try to see how that could be helpful for folks.
Yeah. And I think, Vicki, our area, Brian has been under snow in Stony Point, so he doesn't maybe know all of this, but we've contracted with a cohort and coaching person to develop more cohorts and coaching for a whole area. And I think this could easily be one of the topics. So
great.
Plus, you know, APSE's doing cohorts as well through our office. And so this may be a topic to introduce to that cohort team. So there will be some more cohorts starting in 2021. So there may be an option to do it. It's just that they haven't all been developed yet. So there's not a promise there, but yeah.
Can I ask a question before we're done here?
Please, Susan.
I am really interested. I've had commissioned lay pastor training, but I am preaching and stuff, but I don't want a church. I want to develop materials for retreats. And so I got the email for the lady who said something about her retreat.
Yeah.
And I plan to contact her. But is there any, you know, is there a cohort or a coaching person that, you know, shares about how to organize a retreat, you know, what the flow can be like, that kind of thing?
Stephanie, do you have thoughts? I mean, I know I can coach on doing retreats. I've done a few. I know that
there's a good another topic. I like it.
Yeah. Why don't you email Stephanie and I?
Okay.
And then we can kind of take it from there.
Okay. And you guys' email will be on the PCUSA website in the.
Sure. If you just take our names, put a dot in it, and then put @PCUSA, you've got our email address.
Perfect. Okay. Got it.
Brian.frick@.
Thank you.
And I just would ask, do you have more examples or resources that were less intellectual and more practical?
Sure.
Or, I mean, because you gave a lot of theory, and I heard some interesting practical suggestions that I would love to be able to incorporate.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's what you want to look at the toolkit for. There's so many practical suggestions in that toolkit.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. And then if you have questions, as you're doing the toolkit, you can reach out to either the people that wrote that specific section, or you can check in with Stephanie and, see where other resources are. All right. Who else? I love it when people stick around. Oh, go ahead, Audrey.
Okay, I don't know how to raise my hand on the screen.
That's fine, you just did.
So I found that I've been working with the children of our church for the last number of years. And just recently I'm starting more to work with the youth. And I'm intimidated by them for storytelling. I tell them something and seems like a story and just like, so I know there's probably places to go for youth things. I didn't go to those, but just any encouragement on especially the storytelling one for young people.
I would say vulnerability is really good. The more you can open up and the more you can make something, either something about, when you were their age or even just something now, because they need to see you as more than just a teacher, because oftentimes they'll put you in a role of, I can't talk because I'm learning. But if you can be a storyteller, maybe not even, maybe not say, I'm going to tell you a story now. Just walk in and say, hey, what happened to me today? Blah, 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 blah. I'm having a bad day. If they can see you having a bad day, then they're going to be willing to share their bad day with each other. Does that help?
Yeah, when young people can totally sniff out when we're not being authentic, and that's what they're most upset with the church about. They don't care about the praise bands and the technology and all the fun. They just want people to be real, and they can tell when the church isn't being real.
Right on.
Along those lines, I had a Sunday school teacher, 7th and 8th graders, and the way he started the day was, tell us about your highs and lows for the week. And that seemed to, maybe one person did it. But as the weeks went on in his class, he said they were all opening up. They all wanted to talk. So, and it was a high, sometimes it was a low, and he was able to, say, this is time for listening. And if you need any more help, talk to me later, and maybe I could give you someone to talk to. So that's another way to get young people to open up.
I'm going to throw one more out, Audrey. Know your group. Sometimes they don't talk because they're intimidated by somebody else that's in that group. Be aware whether that person is a person that talks all the time and I'm quiet, so I'm not going to share, or I don't want to share something because I don't want that person to use something against me. That would be one. If you have a challenge with somebody that doesn't share, sometimes parents know why, which is a great way to just reach out and say, hey, checking in, we're having story time, we're trying to encourage this. And, your daughter's really quiet. Is that something that's normal? Should I expect it? Those sorts of things could be helpful because the dynamic you don't know might be at play, might have nothing to do with you and everything to do with that group. Because you're also, if you're just starting with that group and they've been through younger age things together, they've been together, right? So they know each other's story a lot. You don't. So just be aware of where you're entering.
Yeah. That's interesting. When years ago did random acts of kindness, and we had a board where we kept track, and if they had so many random acts of kindness that they could share, we have a pizza party or something. What I found really interesting is when some of the more popular kids would talk about their experience of what they try to do for Jesus by being nice to a kid on the bus, that would like pump up some of the other kids too. Then they were more willing to share, and also it created this whole positive move forward motion of how to live your faith out, and hearing each other do things in school that they wouldn't have noticed if they hadn't brought it up.
Okay, at this point, I'm going to have to end us because they're going to need this room for the next session. So thank you. If you have more of those questions, email Stephanie or I. We love this stuff. This is why we do what we do. So we're really glad you joined.
Thank you, Brian.
Okay.
Thank you
so much.